I am absolutely and so inspired by these young dancers that just performed, because my daughter is a ballerina. She teaches ballet and she dances with the Asheville City Ballet Company, and she also teaches children, which is her favorite thing to do because she's such a great mother and communicates so well with children. And I think that that's one thing that has come, again, from our family line. Casey's a dancer, she's a singer, she writes songs, she plays banjo, guitar, and harp. Those are just the things she does when she's not raising her 3 daughters. It's strong stock that I come from in the Coolidge Stewart line. There are so many things that I could talk about today, and when I began to put this speech together, I went through my life and started to pull parts of my life that I thought might be of interest to a room full of folk singers and people in the music business, and some young, some old, some on their way in, some with a lifetime of experience. And I thought that probably I could talk for a while about my family and about being born into a family of musicians, a family that extended back to my grandparents, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my grandfather. The men played fiddles and banjos and the women sang and danced. And that hasn't changed very much. I was so blessed to be born into a family of singers because I sang before I think I spoke, before I walked, and certainly before I talked. My mother hummed all the time. My grandmother hummed all the time. It's kind of a quiet way of singing, and it's something that's kind of in our family. I see it with the children, with my grandchildren, as my youngest granddaughter sings her life away. She's 7 years old, and if she's not singing, she's dancing and humming. So it is something I think that genetically is carried on. And certainly the love of music is something that's carried on. And that's something that I think we come into this life with. The love of music led me and my sister, my oldest sister Priscilla, and my middle sister Linda to sing from the time I was 2 years old in a trio, and naturally born again into a family of music, harmony comes as naturally as breathing. And it was always so much fun to be in the car, and everybody in the family would be singing. Those trips from Tennessee to Panama City were so much shorter because we were the music. It was spectacular. So I could talk on and on about that. I could talk about my time at Florida State University. I graduated from Florida State. But I think my greatest education at Florida State actually was in the area of being a folk singer. I had 2 folk bands. One was called, and nobody knows what it means to this day, the fourth day windfall. Because we would say, now the fourth day windfall, and everybody would go, ooh. Folk music was significant at Florida State because it was the voice of a generation that was singing the changes that were happening in our society. During the Civil Rights Movement, I remember being at Florida State and standing with my guitar with other singers and standing on the corner and having eggs thrown at us. And tomatoes were also a favorite object to be thrown at the protesters because we protested the fact that black students were not coming to Florida State. Out of 13,000, there were 3 black students. And that was something that we felt needed to change, that was the voice of that generation. And, you kids out there that are actively pursuing music, keep that in mind. Keep that in mind that, as Graham says, we can change the world. We can rearrange the world with our music. After I graduated from Florida State, I went to Memphis, Tennessee, because I I had studied art. As I mentioned, our family were full of artists, and I thought, well, maybe I'll be a visual artist, because I don't think I'm that great a singer. I just loved music, but folk music welcomed me. I was good enough to sing folk music, so I just kept on singing. Went to Memphis, and I'm not saying, this girl that just sang, woo-woo, beautiful, beautiful. And Sylvia Tyson, who's here, she was my hero at Florida State. I listened to her all the time. But when I got to Memphis, I had a greater experience in music because I was introduced to different kinds of music. And at that time, I started listening to people like Mississippi John Hurt and Robert Johnson and Memphis Minnie. She was a big influence in Memphis and often sang in Memphis. And at that time, I met, through my sister, Priscilla, who was also living in Memphis, I met Booker T. As a matter of fact, I introduced Priscilla and Booker T, and they married and moved to California, and I was not far behind them because they were a biracial couple. There was a great deal of prejudice in Tennessee, and they really did move to California so that they could have a married life in peace. Because while they were in the South, my parents had actually had crosses burned on their yard by the Klan because Priscilla had married someone of color. So the rest of my history, as you all probably know, from the time I got to California, Delaney and Bonnie, and quickly through Mad Dogs and Englishmen, and the recording career that came as a result of that. You can all read about that if you're really, really fascinated with my story. You can either read it in my upcoming book, which will be released the first quarter of next year with HarperCollins, or you can go online and find out all sorts of nonsense. Some of it's true and some of it's not. The woman that I want to talk about today was the woman who was most influential in my life, and she truly was a folk singer, maybe one of the original folk singers. Her name was Laura Bell Stewart, and she was my grandmother. She was born in 1898. I'm sorry, 1878. Yes, that's the really hard part to remember, that my grandmother was born in 1878, my grandfather was born in 1868. And when I think about the fact that my grandfather was born almost 150 years ago, and just try to wrap my head around all the changes that have happened, not just in our society, but in music, in our community, it's really unfathomable. My grandmother went from Texas to Tennessee in a covered wagon when she was 12 years old, and of course wrote songs about that. She wrote songs about her family. She wrote songs about birds, the old blue jay, one of my favorite of her songs. She just wrote about her children, she wrote about life around her, and she sang all of the time. She raised 9 children and became my favorite person to spend time with. I loved her so much. When she was 95 years old in 1973, she took a trip from Lafayette, Tennessee, where she lived in a little tiny house up there by herself. She took a trip to California because there were surgeons in California who had found a way to remove cataracts from the eyes of elders, which previously had been a very dangerous surgery, but she was one of the first women who successfully had that surgery. When she got to California, before the surgery, she had to have tests done, so she was there for a few weeks, and she stayed with my parents, who lived up on the mountain just above Priscilla, my sister Priscilla and Booker T's ranch, and they had a recording studio. And Booker, realizing what a great singer and great songwriter Mama Stewart was, he had the idea, presented it to her, Laura, would you like to make a record? And she's like, well, yes, I think I would. And there were mornings during the process when Mama Stewart would wake up and Booker would would go up to the house to get her, and she'd say, "Well, Booker, I just don't feel like my voice is strong enough today. I'll do my vocals in the morning." She did get many of them done. When she had her surgery, Mama knew that Booker was African American, and it didn't make any difference to her, although she had grown up in a community in a completely white farmland country of Kentucky and never really had much interaction with black people at all. She certainly was a woman who had no prejudice in her heart of any kind. When she had the bandages removed from her eyes, Booker was the person that she wanted to see first. And when the bandages were removed, she looked at Booker and she said, with tears in her eyes, "When I see the face of Jesus Christ, he won't be more beautiful to me than you are." That's the kind of heart that she had. And likewise, Booker loved Mama Stewart. He wrote a song about her called "Be My Honeybee," and Mama Stewart wrote a song for Booker called "Honeybee." He was the king bee and she was the queen bee. It's never too late to have fantasies, I'm telling you. They wrote songs about each other. My ex-husband, Chris Christopherson, also loved Mama Stewart so much, and he wrote a song about her called "Everything is Beautiful in Mama Stewart's Eyes," which he released in 2012 because he came to the house when my mother was there, and I was taking care of her just before she passed, and Chris came and played the song for her, and she wept. In 1994, Mama Stewart passed in 1982 with a legacy of hundreds of songs and poems and a personality that just permeates every member of our family to this day. Everyone wants to hear stories about Mama Stewart. So in 1995, my sister Priscilla and my niece, her daughter Laura Satterfield, and I created a group called Walela, which is the Cherokee word for hummingbird. I forgot to mention that Mama Stewart was Scot in Cherokee, but she was a direct descendant of Mary, Queen of Scots. It was written in her Bible. She was 11 times. There were 11 greats in there. Niece of Mary, Queen of the Scots. So when we joined Walela, and really in our hearts, our goal was to go forward with the tradition of Mama Stewart, of singing our stories, and we began this project that became the richest in spirituality of anything that I ever did in my life. Priscilla and I wrote songs about our Cherokee grandmother called Cherokee Rose. We wrote songs about the Cherokee Nation and about the Trail of Tears, and we wrote songs about what we call urban Indians today, the way life is for Indians today. And when the collection of songs was done, we knew that there was one thing missing, and the one thing that was missing was Mama Stewart's voice. And because we knew that we had the recordings from 1973, we reached back into the archives and found Mama Stewart's voice and sang with her on our CD my favorite of all of Mama Stewart's songs. And I think it was hers too, because when someone asked her to sing, she always sang this song. It's called "I'll Turn My Radio On," and Sean is going to cue it up on the CD, and we're going to listen to it together right now. The first voice you hear is Mama Stewart, the greatest of folk singers.
All alone in quiet country, no one to help share my worries, nothing more I can do, all alone as the time's blue. I turn my radio on, my radio on. When there's one you love disappear, know not where, nothing more I
traveled over the highway and I traveled in the air. Couldn't find him anywhere. From the mountains to the valley, from the desert to the plain, to the deepest caves of ocean, traveled over canyon, yeah. Sometimes up, sometimes down, sometimes going round and round. Nothing more I can do all alone, and sometimes blue.
I look forward to that day when the right one comes my way. Nothing more I can do all alone, and sometimes blue. I turn the radio on, my radio on. I turn the radio on, my radio on. I turn the radio on, my radio on.
And then the album was done. If there is one thing that I would say to young people who are coming into this business right now, the first thing that I would say is if you can possibly do anything else, then you should do that. And the next thing that I would say is follow your bliss, because that's the only thing that will make you happy. It has certainly worked for me, and it worked for Mama Stewart. Thank you all.
That was one of the most wonderful presentations I've ever seen.
Well, thank you so
And
much.
it was
Jane.
so folky.
Thank you. I think, for me, I think when I hear people speak, from their hearts, it always touches my heart. People can give information from a book or from a piece of paper, and you may retain some of that information, but the soul and the heart of it is not there. And so thank you. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
You know, nobody moved. I was watching, nobody moved. It was like her voice came on. And I've seen, Chris has a video or something that I saw of her that's got some little snippet of her somehow. Or maybe it's just that he evoked that feeling in my head.
It may be. Or maybe because I've sung for you in Mama Stewart's voice so much. I do it
Yeah,
all
that
the
might be
time.
that
My
too.
friends find it very amusing.
But
I channel her still to the day.
It was familiar, and like all those great mountain voices, it was completely exotic.
Thank you.
You know, it's just a shattering experience. So, what brings you here?
You know, I wanted to be here because, as I mentioned earlier, now I guess I could talk a little bit more about it, but what a powerful influence folk music had on me, how it really set me on my path when I was in college, because I found a venue, I found a place where I could actually take my guitar and just go into any place, and if they would have me, I could sing. I spent one summer in New York at the World's Fair after my freshman year at Florida State. And I would go to work at the World's Fair, and then I would take my guitar down to Greenwich Village, and often became a regular at a place called the Basement Cafe, which later on, I guess, some more famous people, people who were famous, came in and sang. And I went, hi, I worked there. They didn't pay me anything, but they let me sing.
Is that Bleecker Street? That sort of thing.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah, I know where that. I think I know the place you mean. Changed names a few times, I believe. But
it's still
actually
downstairs.
so did a lot of those famous singers. So. When you describe, particularly Delaney and Bonnie, being with them, you describe it the way you describe your family singing, and that was really the beginning for you. in my mind, of knowing who you were or anything. I mean, everybody in that group was like, the first day that you heard that record, you'd never heard of anybody. The next day, they were like your favorite musicians.
They were, and I think that they became the musicians. People, and because I met them in Memphis when they came to record the last commitment to
You
Stax
didn't know them
Records.
before that?
I didn't know them until they came to Memphis, because I was just out of college for about a year when I met them. Leon Russell and Mark Benno came out, and Delaney Bonnie came out to finish their Stax record. And I met them, and they invited me to follow them back to California to do their first record on Elektra. And I think the experience with Delaney Bonnie was very much like being with a bunch of folk singers, or being with my family, where music is being made all the time. We would, when we finished the album, we would go on tour, and we would sing on the bus. We would sing all afternoon on the way to the gig. We'd get to sound check, we'd do sound check, we'd do the concert, we'd go back to somebody's room and just play music all night long. We were young, so we didn't need as much sleep, but because the music really is such an energizing force when you're in your 20s and you're discovering each other and you're discovering what the power of live music is about. It's, as it is with dance, it is with all of us. That's why I'm still able to be on the road and still work a lot, because people like live music, and I love to play it.
And it is an energizer.
It is.
Well, so if we jump ahead for a little bit, because you did a lot of singing with other people, sometimes featured, sometimes not, but not really your thing. You know, somebody else's name was the
Exactly,
headliner.
yeah.
And then for me, the thing with you was Mad Dogs and Englishmen. That was like, to me, that was a stepping out by you. Of anybody that was in that whole troupe, and it was a hell of a troupe. Live or on the record, I always thought that was sort of your genesis as an individual singer.
Well, Joe
Which is funny in the middle of 20 people, but...
Right, but it also, Joe gave me the opportunity to do a solo, and so he was a great friend, and one of the great singers of all times, even back then. And people didn't really understand Joe's, let's say, his stage presence. I understood it because I had felt the same way all of my life, looking at guitar players, and you would see guitar players, you know, contort their faces and make all these ugly, twisty, mouthy things and body gyrations and things while they played, because they were physically interpreting the music that they were playing, and that's what Joe did. I mean, it was totally natural to me, but it was my first opportunity, and at the end of that tour, I was asked to sign a record contract with A&M Records, so that really did lead to my first record contract.
And when you went to make that record, how much of the Mama Stewart thing was in the front of your mind or the back of your mind, either one? Or were you just kind of continuing onward? Because A&M would have wanted you to make much more of a rock or pop record, I would imagine.
Well, I think as far as Mama Stewart has always been with me in everything I've done. Because when I was a small child, I remember leaving her house one day, and she came over and whispered in my ear, and she said, "Don't do anything that you wouldn't do in front of Mama Stewart's eyes." Those words will follow you through your entire life. And even now, I know that she's looking down at me. She's right here. She's right, and there she is right here. And she's still saying those words. So I think that when I recorded and when I chose material, and certainly the way I hope I have handled myself throughout my life, there was always Mama Stewart on my shoulder, my cricket, as it were, my conscience,
Right.
as well as my parents.
And
I
for-
always wanted them
Right.
to be proud. And, you know, I mean, decades, or and not decades, but a decade into my career, before she passed, she came to one of my concerts, and I was so terrified the whole time. But she liked it. So, yeah, oh, that's nice.
But she, it's funny because you do that voice, but when you hear her sing, she sounds big.
I know she does sound big, and of course, that's the voice of a 95-year-old woman. When she was 65, she could really belt it. She was just great. I can't imagine what it was like when she was a young woman, when she was in her 20s, because she sang all the time. As she had told me, when they were traveling from Texas back to Kentucky on the wagon, because everybody in their family sang, and they certainly had the musicians, they had the fiddle and the banjo, that often they would stop where other wagons had stopped for the night so that they felt safe, and they would end up entertaining the other wagons because they had the music wagon, as it were. She used to say, honey, we're not like other people. And I learned what that was.
But were you the first person in your family to become a professional musician in the modern sense?
Yes.
Yeah. But there was no resistance to that. I mean, it wasn't like anything. That wasn't anything inappropriate.
No, it was not inappropriate. Well, honestly, I will tell you that when I decided not to go back to graduate school at Florida State because I had been offered an assistantship in the visual arts, and when I decided to pursue a music career, I'm sure even probably into my second or third album that my parents were waiting for me to wake up and get a real job.
That'll be unfamiliar to everyone in the room.
But then they realized that I really was fine and that I was able to make a fairly nice living. And that's really, if you can just do that, if you don't expect to get a record contract until you're 95, if it happens, it could be at 95. But if you just do it for the love of music and you're able to make a living with music, then you're blessed. Am I right? And if you have to do another little job on the side to be able to do music, because that's the only thing you can do, then you do that too.
And, we were talking about this last night, and this is what we were talking about last night, basically. And we got to talking about music as something in your family that people did. It wasn't something people listened to.
That's right.
Even though they did listen to the radio, obviously. But it was a doing, it was an activity. And to me, that's the folk alliance. They're the people who understand it's not about virtuosity, it's not about getting rich.
Right.
It's about making the world sing.
That's right, because there were no, the radio was invented when my grandmother was like 20 years old. It wasn't invented until the late 90s in Italy, and really wasn't accessible in our country until probably 1920.
That's right.
It's when they went into mass production with radios. So there really wasn't a format for music. It was live music. As a matter of fact, my grandmother and grandfather met at a barn dance, and he was the musician. He came through. He was a circuit riding preacher / banjo player / fiddler. Have you ever
I'm not sure there were a whole lot of those.
I know. He had some side jobs too. It just happened to be preaching. But have any of you ever heard of a song called Devil's Dream? And my grandfather wrote that song, but because of the time, it became public domain. They didn't have publishing in Kentucky.
They didn't know they did.
Right, they didn't know. He didn't.
Well, this thing the book must be amazing because this thing just gets deeper every time I ask you a question and think I might know what you're going to say back. This has been, thank you for letting me do this. This has been one of the great, great opportunities of my life and career.
And I have loved it ever so much.
We had fun, huh?
Just so much. We had fun before we
came
came here.
We had fun from the start, and I hope all of you, because I know most people here perform a little bit or play a little bit or sing a little bit. I hope all of you have that much fun making music.
I hope you do too, and I hope you keep doing it forever. Thank you.
So, thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.